Lag, welcome to Homo Sound.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here again and in Berlin and in person. You just played Berghain, and I know you've been playing there for a couple of times already since 2019. From the first time you played to last weekend when you actually played again, what changed in your experience?
I think it's consistently this Berghain experience. You know, that club has a specific energy and a very dedicated crowd that I don't feel any of that has changed. I think I have a slightly better understanding of the dynamics of different time slots, like what you can expect in different times and what you should offer. I actually had that the first time last year when I was playing the 8:30 in the evening on Sunday, where even though it's always a long enough set for you to be able to express yourself no matter how you want, and you can take journeys and come back and stuff like this, it's felt like a slot where I shouldn't go too deep, and people are still expecting you to give them this kind of a crescendo sort
Yeah.
of thing. So that differed, or at least it differed that I felt it. And then this time again, I felt a certain like this would work better for this time, and I avoided certain paths that I usually didn't. Not because I was afraid or anything. It just felt for this time, this is the music, this is the groove, this is the amount of um, I don't want to say diversity, but the sharpness of the curves that
Yeah.
I like taking in the DJ set. So yeah, it just I'm starting to be more in touch with
Yeah.
everything that's happening there. Because the first time it was just overwhelming, and yeah, I'm getting cozy.
Yeah, yeah. It's beautiful. I was there and had a lot of fun from almost from the start, but definitely until the end. And it
Thank
was
you.
a journey. It was really amazing. I had a lot of fun. And as you noticed, there were tons of people that were actually like, hands up.
Yeah, yeah,
Everybody was
yeah.
having fun and actually, I think, following the journey that you created.
Mm.
Did you feel in while you were playing, were you careful, aware of the crowd reaction to what you were playing, or you were just in your zone?
I'm never just in my zone, despite how it looks. I usually don't look too much towards the crowd. It's because I've learned that growing up when I was playing turntables, because you sort of have to pay closer attention because of the turntables were sort of quirky, and you would have to be dedicated towards what's happening in front of you. So in that era, I learned to listen to people, um, and the feedback is the best sort of the whether people are screaming where you expect them to or not if you expect them to and stuff like this. That's how kind of in the first half an hour you get to familiarize yourself with the people in front of you. I started forcing myself to look more, to use my eyes more, but it's always, for me, it's always a dialogue. And so I'm not exclusively looking to crowd please. I think it's like a push pull kind of thing, where, or give take, where some sections I will make sure to make most of the room happy, and then I'll play something that might not please 60% of the crowd, but if it connects and really stays with like 5 to 10% of people and they go home thinking about this,
Yeah.
then I have done my job. So I like to do a little bit of challenging every time I feel like I've earned enough credit to do so.
Yeah.
So it's ebb and flow, and Berghain is always generous enough to give its DJs long slots, so you have room to do many of those experiments. So
Yeah.
it's always a joy there,
Yeah. 4 hours is a good time to express yourself, I think.
very much.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think about?
Except if it's a really bad sound system,
Yeah, at the point it's too much.
then 30 minutes is too much. So in Berghain, yeah, it works perfectly, but 4 hours, it really depends on the venue.
It really depends. I think Bergen, yeah, they do an amazing job with sound systems.
Yeah.
Like the experience, both when you're DJing apparently, but also like when you are listening, it's just fantastic. Do you think about yourself as a DJ first or producer first?
I think DJ first. I think because the producer is more about this is who I am, and then I let this into the world. Whereas as a DJ, DJing has this unique thing of being a conversation when it comes to music performance. So if it's only this is me, this is me, this is me, then it takes away from the involvement of the crowd, and it becomes too much of an ego thing.
Yeah.
You're already in the center of attention, and if it's just like, well, this is my expression, at least for me, if it's this is my expression and who doesn't like it, can, and like zero flexibility about that, then it feels egoistic and it feels to go against the principles that I grew up on.
Yeah.
That said, I can clearly tell that being a producer has influenced the way that I DJ, and also vice versa. DJing has influenced the way I make music, and it has helped me understand how to create my own narratives using tracks as tools rather than just playing tracks as
That's the DJing part.
Yes,
Specifically.
yes.
Yeah.
Whereas with production, I've learned to make less of a song and more of a track. Because I would make a track that tells a story and then never play it.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't fit how I DJ. So I started making more of a, still things will be happening, but it's more of a contained amount of energy and emotion. It doesn't go so wild with, ups and downs and stuff like that.
Yeah. So in a way, like the way you're DJing or the way you like to DJ and build Star is influencing how you produce a track, because you always think about a track as something that will be played in a set by you or someone else.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And one thing that we touch a lot of times in our private discussions is always like, how much do you do something that is for your taste, to fit your experience and your taste in music, and how much do you listen to the outside world? Did you find a balance? Do you go one way or the other? So again, like when you're producing music, you go with your taste only, or you look really at what the world is liking about your music and your stuff?
I think I don't, like I made this compromise ages ago where I used to make a lot of different styles and people would tell me, well, you don't have a style. And then I made a decision, okay, I'm going to stick to these few things that I'm going to contain myself into some of my favorite things.
Yeah.
And I sort of stayed within those parameters with occasionally moving out of them. Like for my own pleasure, I will make other kinds of music, but just what I present to the world is sort of, it is contained. So it's sort of a compromise, meaning that, again, it's the stuff that I really like, but I'm also just making sure that it's focused for the business to be viable. Because even though it's art and even though I love it, it's also supposed to be and has been my source of livelihood since like 2014.
Yeah.
So I have to take some certain things into account. But even that said, I don't think I think about the business side enough. I think I'm too sort of spoiled to just or not necessarily spoiled, but I find it difficult to detach myself from the art.
Yeah.
So it's difficult for me to say, well, do this even though you might not feel like doing it because it's going to help you and help your career. It's just it's too personal. I'm literally talking to a friend about collaborating so that I can, through that collaboration, try to disconnect myself a little bit more from this feeling, as at least as an experiment to see where it goes and what I make.
Yeah. When you say this, like for clarity, this is like disconnecting from having to, just have a consistency in the message of what you express outside, right? So you want to find a project where you can go completely free to produce whatever you want.
I want to find a project where my ego is not so infused with the music that I output. So it's more of a disconnection where I'm thinking about the craft of making music as the craft of making music rather than me putting my soul out.
Yes.
Where both of these things are viable. Like only thinking I'm making art, I think it's a little bit, having your head too much up your arse. Pardon my French. But if also we have to sort of remind ourselves that we are there to entertain people. So if there are ways to explore that and make my stuff more entertaining without necessarily, doing something that I can sleep with.
Yeah.
Or live with, then yeah, I need to explore it. But I have to disconnect myself from this notion that this is a piece of me that I'm just letting go into. I hope that makes sense.
It makes sense, and especially like on the last point that you made, which is like feeling that what you're putting out is a part of you. If you find anything in terms of like your mindset or any thoughts that you can apply to actually successfully disconnect from this, because for context, I have the same challenge, and I know a lot of other producers have, which is like you feel so afraid of feedback or judgment on every piece of music you put out that eventually you hold back on a lot of stuff because you are so attached. So you think, okay, it's me, that I'm putting into a track. If I get a negative feedback, if nobody gives a shit, like, my life is destroyed, which I don't think is the case. Otherwise, everybody gets blocked.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like,
it makes sense. That said, I have to say that for me, that's not the case. For me, it's like I spent a lot of my youth feeling the pressure to be different than what I am.
Right.
And then it took me a lot of time to be insistently happy with just putting out the stuff that, not putting out, but just being myself.
Yes.
And this feels like just being myself.
Perfect. Okay.
But that said, if I'm just confined to what I like about myself or what I think is me, then I fail to put myself out of this box that I built. I and thus prevent myself from potentially growing, finding stuff that I might like in the great unknown, which is, all the stuff that I haven't explored yet. So it's sort of a tension between feeling truthful, but also confined, and going outside of your comfort zone, but maybe creating something that is not necessarily honest. So that's the danger, and I don't want to put anything out that doesn't feel honest. But then again, how do you recognize who is the person that you are going to become? Because you might stumble onto something that might grow into you with time. So the big quandary is like, okay, what of these new things that I try that I'm not sure about? How do I become sure about them?
How do you, do you have a process for that, or you just like wait until it feels you?
No. It's one of these things that I tell all people, like, you have to, I do challenge myself all the time, but I challenge myself more on the production side, like how I process things and stuff like this. But I haven't challenged myself in some time when it comes to, for example, completely changing the palette of my sounds, or completely changing how melodic my stuff is, or I feel like I should have. I remember listening to Mick Gordon, who composed the music for the Doom video game. he has these sessions that he holds with his friends where they the goal is not to make anything. The goal is just to experiment and
Very interesting.
fail.
Yeah.
And through that, you sort of run into things that should connect to you, and you instantly feel them. Okay, this is me. My issue is that if I sit down and reach for gear, I feel I'm not productive if I'm just fiddling around.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ran into this, but like trying to learn a new software or new plugins, or a piece of hardware, it just feels like, okay, I'm wasting time instead of I'm investing into the future.
But exactly. My question is always like, is there wasting time when you're making music? Because part of why we do what we do is that we enjoy actually wasting time, right? It's making the act of music, not everything we end up creating or playing with ends up getting released or played and everything. Like just the act itself is research for something else, is experimentation, is the pure act of playing. Is it wasting time? I mean, I know that this is how we can feel, right?
For sure it's not, but I keep trying to tell my brain that, and it just it goes like, no. So yeah, I don't know the secret to for me, it's easier if there are other people in the room. And then we are together exploring things.
As an audience or as co-producers?
No, as co-producers.
Co-artists, yeah.
But otherwise, if I'm alone, it's very difficult. Like similarly as it's very difficult for me to just give it a rest and say enough for today. It's similarly difficult for me because there's this, I don't know, I think it's just that the scene has sped up so much and the shelf life of releases is shorter. Not the shelf life, but the play life. They get shelved much faster. So I think there's this ever increasing urgency about you have to make more, you have to release more. Yeah. So as age passes, I feel more urgency at like, okay, you have to finish more stuff, you know?
Yeah.
Like last year I released 5 records and still I had this, you have to do more, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know how to get rid of that. Ketamine. I'm joking. No. But it's just, that's maybe a topic for therapy.
Yeah. It's, I mean, a lot of any creation, like, especially when you're producing, you're alone in the room, like, and there's no, it's not that you get, it's a test, right? Where you have clear rules. You know, if you play by the rules, you train yourself to pass the test, you get a score. Someone with a very clear structure grades you. It's like fucking music. You don't know who's going to like it. Is it going to be commercially successful? Is this going to lead to gigs? Nobody knows.
It's a complete roll of the dice. Like one release released in one year can do nothing. And then if it dropped a different year and you get played by someone, it can completely blow up. So there's not much worth in thinking about it, but we still do.
Yeah.
And it's also one of these things like stop. No, it's just your brain doesn't. It's just like, nope, I'm going to do this.
Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah.
Fuck you. And once we were talking about like your style and basically like what do you have carved for yourself, I think when I think about your music, I always think about groove, which is a big part of like the way you, I think of what remains impressed when someone listens to your production, your tracks. How do you think about groove?
I'm very much obsessed with it. Like this thing that we love and enjoy. It's called electronic dance music. And I think at some point this groove disappeared, like mid 2000s. I couldn't really put my finger on it, but everything did feel wrong for a time. And I think it came from a lot of people switching to PCs, which there's nothing wrong with switching to PCs. It's just that by nature of things, then you don't have like 5 pieces of gear linked up and you just have one MIDI clock that says, you know, now, rather than having to rely on MIDI and janky MIDI clocks and stuff like this, which always introduce some sort of looseness. And this looseness and this unpredictability and this so to say, brokenness. I'm not talking about like broken beat, but
Yeah.
the broken structure of where everything should be. I think it helps make it more interesting, make it more
More human.
complex,
Yeah.
more human, and also more confrontational. So for me, like it's like watching a movie that doesn't have any conflict. That's what listening to music that everything where everything is on the grid feels like.
Yeah.
And then if you have things which are slightly at odds, then there's some tension between the sounds. I read like a few days ago, someone wrote, "You have to break things for the light to come in," which I like. But basically, yeah, it's difficult to define anything. It's difficult to have, especially with music, it's difficult to have clear definitions of what is what. But I tend to think about rhythm in three concepts. One is drive, which signifies how urgent, immediate, energetic some rhythm is, and it sort of depends on a number of things. It depends on the placement of sounds. It depends on the it depends on sort of the length of the phrase as well. Like if it's a short phrase, it has more urgency. If it takes time for you to hear the entire phrase, then it has less urgency. It depends on the quality of sound, meaning like is it distorted, is it glassy, is it gentle, but also, and most importantly, the amount of rhythmical elements in the equation. So
Yeah.
not just percussion, but also synths being played in a rhythmical manner and stuff like that. The second concept is complexity, which is how complex the rhythm is. And here it gets deeper because you can focus on any aspect of the sound and then explore the complexity of that aspect. So for example, saying frequency wise, if your entire rhythm is just 5 sounds in the lower spectrum, it's less complex than having a few sounds in the lower spectrum, a few sounds in the mid range, and then a few sounds in the highs. But you can apply this to anything and just explore that area. And then the third one is groove, which is what I described just now. And basically, I would say this is like the error in what your brain predicts that makes your brain engaged and gives it an initiative to fix this error through movement.
Yeah.
So it's basically sounds being off the grid. It's also change in velocity. So your brain will hear the sound in a certain way, expect it to be the same again. And then when velocity changes, you kind of get a surprise, and it's like, okay, now I'm engaged. And there's also movement, which is a little bit difficult to explain without examples, but it's like, the opening of the filter, or actually anyone liking dubstep knows what I'm talking about with the wub wubs. So these three things, they overlap.
Yeah.
They're not like three separate things. The concepts overlap, but if you sort of think about it, outline them as concepts, it's easier to define things. It's easier to feel what's off, what's wrong, to make decisions within these concepts and be aware of what you're doing. So knowing all these things, thinking about them really helps me make decisions and make the sound that sounds like me.
Yeah. It super interesting also because like we spoke a lot, like you were helping with my production, reviewing my production, and we spoke a lot about intentionality of like, where you put some elements in certain spaces. And I know you're working a lot with other producers, not just me, but other friends of us or other producers around the world. when you look at the journey of a producer who's starting off and is like started to release some music out, what do you think are the biggest mistakes maybe or the biggest pitfalls where people get stuck?
I think the main issue is not exploring. First of all, the main issue is not reading the manual. I think that's like the RTFM, read the fucking manual, is like the number one thing that could help people. I have to say I'm also guilty of this to a certain extent. I've gotten lazy over the years, but I started off with just reading the manual for the DAW I was working in. It helps you find so many things and realize how things work. And also, you always like whenever someone teaches you or shows you videos and stuff like this, like video tutorials, they will teach you what they think is important. But what you feel is important might be overlooked.
Right.
And by reading the manual, even though it's boring because it's so thorough and like very sterile in the way that they lay things out, you can run into things that no one mentioned but are very important to you.
Right.
So, for example, I'm obsessed with micro timing. So none of the tutorials that I like, they might mention micro timing on the analog rhythm, but no, they just gloss over it, and no one goes into detail why this is important, why this is why this can be musical and helpful. So RTFM, and then the second thing is not actively thinking about what decisions you are making and why you are making them. So people go into this, I don't know, like just autopilot mode
Yeah.
without without taking into account the context of what they're making. Like, for example, if you have a big bass line, can you have a huge kick as well? So people will try to make both and then find that it's nearly impossible.
Yeah.
Or just like try to have two melodies in the same register with the same type of oscillators, so no separation in space and stuff like this. So just actively thinking about what you're doing can help you avoid so many of these. One of my favorite sessions to have with people is the processing order.
Yes.
Like, do you put the compressor before the reverb or after reverb? And why in this particular case? Because there's no right answer. There's just like what you want, and it matters where you put things, but you have to actively think about things. So I think those are the two most like
Common ones.
get informed, and then also actively be aware of what you're doing, rather than just flailing in the dark and hoping that something comes out of it.
And I certainly was I had both the challenges, I think, before when we started doing the sessions together, and it's definitely it's hard. I think whatever, there's different reasons why that happens, and when it comes down to, for example, overcoming self-doubt as an artist, say mindset challenges. Have you seen people struggling with something in particular, like from people you got exposed to, from your own experience? For example, like people doubting themselves so much that they end up not releasing music.
Sure. There's this notion that you make music and then you send it to a label and you get released. And then you face the harsh reality that labels, first of all, a lot of labels that release vinyl, they lose money.
Yeah.
And also because they offer something that a lot of people want, they are swamped with requests and everything. And even if they like your stuff, they might not be able to do it in the next 2 years because they already have a schedule. I think a lot of people get discouraged by just not being able to push their music through, and then a lot of self-doubt comes. And my only advice for those people is to be aware of the other side of the story, which is it might not be personal.
Yeah.
It just might not be that stars have like a lot of people will. I've heard a lot of people in my home country say that I was lucky to release on Mord back when I did, they haven't been introduced to all the cases where I was unlucky, where no one listened to my tracks, where the label just said no. Like
Yeah.
even after I was established as a producer, I would have this like a half year period where I would send a full album's worth of tracks to different labels, and they all tell me, we can't release this. Can you send me all the files so I can play them? So they like the music, but they're just unable to
Yeah.
fit it, or they just don't want to risk it, or I don't know, like whatever the issue is. Knowing that they like it is so frustrating. And this was long before I released. I had these experiences, and then also afterwards. So it's a very natural state of things. The stars have to align, and it's not personal.
Yeah.
It's not. It really isn't. And all of those tracks I released in the end, and they, they're being played. It works well.
Yeah.
It really wasn't about quality. It's just
Yeah.
that's the way it was.
Were you like the first times when you started getting these rejections, right? Were you taking it personal? What was your mindset at that time?
Well, it's difficult not to take something personal when you sort of work hard on something that is not detached from who you are.
Yeah.
Because it is your expression, and it's sort of your, no matter how simple it is, it's your child. And then someone telling you, well, your child is ugly and not talented, you'll take it personal. But also, a lot of people will, when they say no, a very good thing to do is to ask them for feedback, like how you can improve and stuff like this, and they'll be happy to give you some advice, and then it's up to you to sort of discern from that advice if it's bullshit.
Yeah.
And by bullshit, I don't necessarily mean that they are lying to you or anything, but just in your constellation of things and what matters to you and what's
Right.
important to you. Like if you're making tools that you really want just them to be dry and sort of minimalistic, and then someone tells you should add melodies, then it's not an advice for you.
Right.
But if they tell you, well, it's dry, but you can maybe change the pattern here or something like that to make it more interesting, maybe that resonates with you. So, and also it shows the label owners that you're not entitled and that you're open to the experience of people who are in the scene for much
Right.
longer time. And last point is, if they do send you feedback, know that these are people who have zero time. This is I'm swamped daily with people sending me tracks to listen to, even to help them find labels and stuff like this, and I'm not Ben Clock.
Yeah.
So I can I can imagine like
probably gets-
the A-listers, like the triple A-listers, how much time they don't have, and how much they have to balance between being nice and having their own life. So if they do reply, just remind yourself that
You're very lucky.
you're very lucky, and these people are very generous people. Even if they reply with like one paragraph, you're very, very lucky.
Yeah, that's beautiful and super, super important. And in your view, like, have you ever considered starting a label? And if yes, what made you decide not to start your own label, for example?
Well, before I didn't want to do it because it was paramount to release on vinyl. And I'm not in the EU, so the entire distribution thing is tricky. There's extra taxes, and it's just a mess. But recently, I've been thinking about starting a just digital only label, where I get to release myself and people I like. And it's a double-edged sword, because there's a lot of people who will still think about music that's digitally released as, well, this is not good enough for vinyl. But then it also has this other side where you don't have to think about sales and breaking even, because barely any record makes money. It's
Right.
just about getting to the point of being zero. So it's really a matter of making a decision and then sticking with it, and making sure that if you know that you're doing this because you have a vision which will be easier to express through digital, just make sure that that vision comes through.
Yeah.
Because if you're just going for digital because it's easier, you're not going to make an impact. And also it's just, I don't know, it's sort of chickening out of contributing to a scene in one way or the other. Because
Yeah, yeah.
vinyl still has value. I don't play vinyl. Like, I buy a lot of records, but I don't play vinyl. But I think it still has a certain thing that's both romantic and shows dedication
Right.
to the thing that we love. But that's just my opinion. I
Yeah.
have no idea.
Which I think is shared by a lot of people, especially in the dance music and within techno. I think is very much present. I think this feeling
Yeah.
vinyl is the thing that matters the most. And I think because it is definitely physically harder to do pressed vinyls, especially in the last 3 years after the pandemic. Like, I think it counts even more when a vinyl comes out, because you had to go probably through a lot of filtering of tracks before it went into the vinyl. Digital, one can just make a track now and release it in 2 hours on Spotify or SoundCloud, right?
Yep.
So it really, like, there is a perception at least of track on vinyl has to have gone through a lot of filtering and work.
There's a lot of really bad shit on vinyl.
Yeah, for sure.
Sure. I really honestly don't think it to be any quality control, but I understand why people do.
But it's a perception thing, right? So it's probably the perception of like scarcity versus abundance of digital tracks.
Yes. I think there's a lot of people who don't live like you and I live, where we think about this every day of the week. There's a lot of people who have lives and are just casually or
going out with their partners,
or a little bit more involved, but not crazy amount. So for them to make a decision, okay, I'm just gonna go through the vinyl releases because I don't have the time for the hundreds of techno releases that came out, in the last 6 hours. I understand it. I don't hold it against anyone. But I think there's also there's a growing disconnection between, it used to be I release or whoever you release a record, and then people hear about your production, and that's sort of a billboard for you to get DJing.
Yeah.
I think people who go to parties now care, like the majority of people care less and less about, unless it's a super hit, people don't really care that much about who made the track.
Yeah.
Like, we recently saw this change of Soma Records is, instead of doing promos, they are offering people to a chance to pay like 20 or something like that
subscription
pounds,
basically.
yeah, and then get the releases in advance, because I think that they see that you playing tracks that you downloaded for free ahead of time to create hype doesn't create any hype anymore. I don't think people are like, oh, I can't wait for this to come out.
Right.
Everything has gone super fast. The life of a record is shorter. So I think now, with the lessening of this dynamic that I described, I think it's easier to just go, fuck it, let's do digital, and then when we have room, we'll do vinyl. I think HoS Collective is a great example of that. They did a lot of really, really good releases, and they're starting to get into releasing vinyl as well, but still sticking to the digital stuff. Other great examples as well, but this is the first that came to mind.
Yeah, got it. Last two questions as we wrap up. One is, recently Surgeon played one of your tracks on BBC Radio 1 Mix. How did that make you feel?
It made me feel as it always does when Surgeon plays my tracks. I mean, Surgeon is It's like Surgeon and Groskopa are the people who whose production I love the most growing up, and Surgeon was the first of the heavy hitters to play my tracks in sort of a recorded fashion, where people could hear them in a set, which sort of solidified that these are tracks worthy of being played. And he knows it makes me happy. So like when when it happens, I'm very quick to know and to thank him. And he's just a legend. And like even the track that he played, I sort of I have several of these artists that I adore, and to a certain extent I steal from them. Like I try to imitate, but it ends up it does end up sounding like me. Like for example, DJ Shuffle Master, DJ Boss, Rummenigge, Surgeon. But this track was really heavily influenced by Surgeon, so I think it's sort of a full circle to have this in his set.
Cool.
It's always a joy. He's also one of my favorite producers, one of my favorite DJs. It's magic.
Very cool. Very excited for you. Any new projects, upcoming projects you're particularly excited about?
I do these things that I don't think a lot of people in the scene know about them, because it's sort of centered around my region. So I'll often remix existing tracks in Serbian or Croatian or whatever. And if I see them fitting into my set in a certain way, I'll do a remix, and then I'll make sure not to release them, because that sort of reminds me of the olden days where if you wanted to hear a certain track, you would have to go and see the DJ who has that record. And it's like a difficult to find record and stuff like this. So for me, I have more of these appearing in my sets. I'm thinking of maybe retiring or releasing some of the older ones, so that might happen. And also I just started making ghetto tech with a friend, which it's so stupid, it's so silly, ironic and everything, but it's so fun. And we just do them like this. It's like 2 sessions and it's done. And I look forward to I'm just gonna put those out on Bandcamp, but it's so stupid, and I like techno is very serious, and techno, especially in Berlin, I think there's too much seriousness around it. There's like yes, it's art. Yes, it's what I call shadow music. It can sort of explore the most magical or dark or precious parts of the human soul, but also every emotion is valid, and so is stupid. So I like stupid, happy stuff as well. I grew up on like Fatboy Slim and stuff like this that I really, really loved. So I'm happy to be putting out something that falls onto that category, which is just plain silly, whatever.
For fun.
There's a few more records coming up that I'm excited about, but not sure if I'm allowed to speak about them yet. And yeah, there's more to come.
Yeah, we will look forward to all of this. And we have a closing question tradition, almost sound, which is we have a question for you from one of the previous guests, and you can ask a question for one of the next guests.
Sure.
How do you want to start? You want to ask the question? Or you want to get the question?
Get a question and then I'll ask.
If you were not a DJ producer, what would you be? What would be your profession?
Well, I like teaching a lot, but I like teaching the thing that I love, which is music. So if music wasn't in the equation, I don't know what I would be teaching.
I think it's decent enough. It's like, yeah, teaching.
Teaching, sure. My question would be, in spite of what do you keep pushing forward?
Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, man.
Me. Yeah.
Thank you. Until next time.
Hope to see you soon again.
Yeah, we'll do it in another 3 years. Thank you.